All right, today we're going to talk about Windows Server backup and disaster recovery. Obviously, like in IT, one of the most important things is your data. Your company probably could lose all its hardware, like the servers, the client machines, all the network switches, routers, and stuff like that. Okay, all of that is not ideal, but obviously we could potentially lose all of that. Like someone could break in and steal everything. So the offices could be burnt down. And you know what? All that kind of stuff is important and it costs a lot of money, but it's not irreplaceable. Okay, we can just, the insurance will pay out, we'll get the money, and we'll go repurchase all those things. Even the configuration of your servers, it's not irreversible. Let's say we lost the configuration, we can reset up the server according to what we want, maybe even do a better job this time around than the first time around. But the key thing is your data. Okay, some data is reproducible. For example, this PowerPoint what's the presentation I've got in front of me? If it got deleted and I didn't have a copy or I didn't have a backup of it, it'll be annoying. But I can certainly create another document, another PowerPoint that has the same information in it. It might be annoying. It might take a long time, but I can do it. But then there's data that can't be replaceable, not replaceable. Okay, let's just say you had, think of your own situation at home. Okay, let's say that now, I'm sure you guys have taken photos on your cameras or in your phones and whatnot. Let's just say you've backed up all those, you placed all those pictures onto your phone, and that's the only place you had it. And then one day your phone, you leave your phone in your on the bus, and you can never find it again. Okay, how are you going to get those photos back if you've never backed it up anywhere else? Okay, so that's irreplaceable, isn't it? You can't go back and recreate every picture you've taken and try to retake those pictures. Some of them is like time sensitive and in the moment. So in the business sense, what about the logs? What about the transactions? You can't recreate those transactions or logs easily, can you? So what really is important to a company or to a business is their data. The hardware, the people, they all can be replaced. But the data is what your company is relying on to get things done, to have records. So basically, even though backups and disaster recovery is one of the most critical things you'll learn in every aspect of IT. Doesn't matter what you do, you'll realize that that is very important to any situation. So today we're going to talk about data protection, an overview of that, and also look at this Windows Server backup and recovery. And trust me, there's all sorts of backup and recovery tools in the world. But why are we not talking about all of those? Because obviously some of them are proprietary, some of them are cost you extra money, some of them come with actual hardware that you purchase. But what we're going to talk about is the Windows Server backup and recovery, which is part of the Server 2016, as well as your Windows operating system in general. And we're going to look at planning for continuity. So continuity is how can our business continue to operate in the event of a major disaster. Okay, I'll give you an example of this. If our company is making $1 million profit every year and suddenly our office burns down, do we just stop doing that business? Do we just say, hey, forget about making that $1 million this year, we're not going to do that business anymore, we're going to get out of it? Of course not. No one in their sensible mind will stop doing a business that's making you great profit just because your office is burnt down. So planning for continuity allows us to think about what we can do in case that's a possibility. And even though it's a very low likelihood of the whole office being burnt down, it is a possibility. And if it's $1 million profits every year, maybe I want to spend some of that $1 million profits every year to have it so that I can continue to make $1 million in the future by maybe having backups, by maybe having spare replaceable things, maybe even having another office as a branch office in the meantime, but be able to use as a head office if the head office actually gets burned down. So, but with backup and protection, my lecturer always used to say, how long is a piece of string? Okay, so if you've ever heard that, what does it mean? It means that, you can spend so much money and time on it, but where do you start? Where do you stop? Okay, so it depends on what your budget is and what is how much risk things are. So, for example, we can protect ourselves against all sorts of things, like a meteor shower, like a bushfire. But some of those risks are very low, even though the impact is very high. But if the risk is so low, maybe we don't have the budget to address it. But if we're like, if our business is so important, let's say we were the Commonwealth Bank of Australia, then maybe we have to think about stuff like that, because our business is so important and that the profits are so high and our budgets are high enough to justify spending on that. So let's talk about recovery requirements. So what you need to do first of all is identify for your business or your client, identify your data protection options by defining the organization's critical resources. Do we go off and back up absolutely everything? Probably not. Okay. So for example, each one of these computers in front of us has data on it. But what's important about it? Well, to me, nothing's important on these computers because they're client computers, they have an operating system, and they have data that students have left on it. We tell students that this is not where you store your data if it's important. So therefore, we don't have to worry about backing up these client computer data. Really, there's nothing really that is that's so important on there to be backed up. So that's what I'm talking about. Go through and identify what is your actual critical data. Identify the risk associated with those critical resources. For example, you need to do a risk analysis, and one easy way is to actually classify the risk. For example, our L drive, where all your files are. One of the risks is that our lecturer could accidentally delete it. Okay, is the risk high? Well, it's a lot higher than bushfire, definitely. What would be the impact? The impact is not that high. It's really medium, because let's say a lecturer accidentally deleted, maybe it's only affecting one specific session in one specific subject, maybe. Depends on what they delete. If it's just one file, if it's a whole L drive, different story. So, and if it's actually low risk or medium risk, medium impact, maybe that's something we want to look at. So what can we do to protect ourselves against that? But if it's low risk and low impact, maybe we don't even worry about it. Okay? If it's low risk and high impact, maybe we'll think about it. But if it's any, so we need to sort of classify where we start drawing the line, saying this is where we have to protect ourselves against these type of risks. So that's what's called a risk analysis, and you need to sort of conduct that on your business. Identifying the time needed to complete the recovery. So some recovery options take a very, very long time. If you have tape drives, for example, because they're sequential, just like you guys probably don't even know what a tape is, but it's actually, you can only read what's in the middle after you go through all the things that's at the front of the tape. It's not like a CD-ROM or DVD or even hard drive where you can just jump around to wherever the data is. Because a tape is actually one long piece of ribbon, it actually has to wind through to that area of the tape where your data is, and that restoration might take a very long time. So you're probably wondering, why would anyone use tape? Mainly because it's actually very cheap for the capacity you can back up. And obviously, other things could be that you back up to the cloud, to the internet. We have the cloud these days. We've got storage. We've got iCloud. We've got OneDrive. We've got all sorts of cloud storage. Okay. So again, the recovery time, if it's on the cloud, how fast can we restore the whole file system? Well, it depends on our internet connection speed, doesn't it? So maybe that's, again, might be a little longer. So if we actually backed up to something else, like a portable hard drive, and it's kept on site, that might be a lot faster to recover from. So, but what I'm trying to say is there's all these options for backing up, but identify what is the time requirement. If it's it's one of those things where it has to be backed up within hours, then we have to find the right technology for that. But if it's one of those things where you have a longer time period, then you choose the technology for that. It's always a balance between cost versus functionality. Okay, and also depends on what's called a SLA, a service level agreement. What is the service level agreement between you, the support person, and the company who's actually paying your wages, or a company who's actually contracted that out to you? So this allows us to develop a protection strategy. So strategy is not just a haphazard thing. It's actually a way a strategy of actually being able to protect your client or your company's data in a way to back it up. How are you going to back it up? How are you going to store it? How are you going to restore it? And how quickly that's going to be done. So all that is defined in what's called a service level agreement. So it defines the responsibility of your service provider. In this case, you guys, whether that be in-house or to a third-party company, you are the service provider at question. Okay. The SLA components include hours of operation. So, for example, if they have a problem at 3 a.m. on Sunday morning, are you going to be available, or someone going to be available to support them? And if it's no, then that can't be in the SLA. Okay, if you're only going to provide support from 9 to 5, Mondays to Fridays, then that's what has to be defined in the SLA. But you'll find that you have to match that with what the company needs are. So, for example, if the company here in question is TAFE SA, we have classes Monday to Friday from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. So if you're saying that we won't support you after 5 p.m., that might be a problem. So it's a negotiation and agreement between you, the support person or company, and the company you're providing support for. Another one is service availability. So what are you going? How are you going to say? Are we going to guarantee a availability of 97% of the time? What does that mean? That means 3% of the time it could be offline. Okay, so most companies and big companies and professional companies aim for the the 5 nines, 99.999 uptime. That's only a mere hours every year that you can be offline. So when I'm saying offline, I'm saying offline for reboots, for patches, offline for because it's actually had a fault, or offline for whatever reason. So this is like a guarantee. So if you say I'm going to give you the 5 nines, it just can't be saying that's what we that's just what we say. It has to be sort of a guarantee as such. So what does that mean? That means you have to make sure that the servers that you are actually going to provide for them have redundancies. Okay, and what if even the whole site fails? Then you have to have continuity strategies. There's an RPO, recovery point objective, and RTO, recovery time objective. So recovery point objective is something like we will be able to recover your data to 6 months ago, as far as 6 months ago. Okay, so that might be okay for this company, might not be okay. But this is again in SLA where it's a discussion, it's a negotiation. If you say I can recover your your data to 6 months ago, and the company says no, we want more than that, we want 5 years because that's our legal requirement for keeping records here, then you have to then adjust your backup strategy so that you can actually recover that up to 5 years old. That may mean more storage, it may mean more backups, it might mean more storage capacity. There's RTO, recovery time objective, is how fast I can recover your objects. If you say we can recover your objects within 24 hours, that sounds about reasonable. But what if they say, hey, that's not good enough, we want it into 12 hours or less? But again, this is defined between you and the company. It obviously means that if the time is lower, it means it limits the technology you can use, or the way it's a combination of how you're going to store the backups and where you're going to store the backups. Because if it's a long recovery time objective, then you can store it on tape, online, elsewhere. Then you can just drive down there, get the backups, drive back, restore it, potentially. But all that, it comes into your strategies, doesn't it? Okay, so it defines your strategies. Retention objective. Like I said, some places, like for example, TAFE SA, we have a requirement to keep, let's say, student assignments, for example, for 6 months for ASQA, and 18 months for NCVR. Okay, don't worry about those organizations, but they're just what our regulatory organizations require us to do. So therefore, if you lose that data and they come and do an audit, and you can't produce that, you fail to audit. And that's going to be, it might possibly mean that your company, or in this case TAFE, cannot continue to train people. So retention objective is like how long you're going to keep the data for, okay? And what about system performance? Yeah, obviously it's great that we're getting all this backup and protection and all that kind of stuff, but what if our services run run so badly that we can't even do our work properly. So performance is to do with this level of performance that you as a service provider is going to give to the company or the client. So enterprise data protection strategies. You need strategies for recovering data. So like I said, data is probably number one priority. Then services. Okay, what do we mean by that? Let's say we've got a website. It's providing a website for people to come here to get information. Let's say TFSA to get information. Okay, what if that site goes down? Okay, the server blows up. How are you going to provide this service to the customers again? Because it could be that these customers don't actually go and train with us because they couldn't get to the site. So therefore, your strategies for recovering the service might be that, hey, instead of having one server, we might have a cluster of servers. So if we have a power failure on one, the other one takes over straight away, so no disruption. That's just an example, obviously. So obviously depends on the service, depends on how important the service is, and you can adjust your ways of protecting those servers differently. What about the servers? Okay, or maybe one strategy is that if the servers die, well, if they're virtual machines, wouldn't it be good to just get a new server, put the virtual machines that's on them on the new server, and you're up and running straight away, aren't you? But if they're physical servers, it's a little bit harder. You might have to back up the image of the server and put it on a new hard drive and get it up and running. It's a little bit harder if it's not virtualized, but you'll find that most networks will contain some sort of virtualization if it's not all completely virtualized. Okay, what about the whole site? Okay, so if you have if this is a TFSA site here at Adelaide and the whole site was cut off by a power outage, for extended power outage, what can we do? Well, some things are out of our hand. We can't protect against SA power being totally out. And to be honest, TFSA is not so mission critical that we have to have it up and running in the event of a statewide power outage like we saw last year or something like that. So, but if your company is, what if you're a hospital? You can't just go offline because there's a power outage. People's lives depend on it. So therefore, maybe having backup generators, UPSs, which is uninterruptible power supplies, which are then powered by diesel generators, which has tanks that can be refilled every 2 weeks and so forth. That you can almost indefinitely go running forever like that. It might cost you a lot more, but you can potentially, and that's how depends on how important your services, your data, your servers, and your site is. But what if the whole site gets wiped out? Okay, so how are you gonna keep on doing business? Like we said, you make $1 million a year, your whole site gets wiped out. Are you going to say, hey, forget about that $1 million a year profit? We're not going to do it anymore. No way. So basically, maybe we can have things like replication. Okay, so now instead of our servers actually just being on this site, we might have multiple sites, branch offices, and then our servers get replicated across the different sites. So with Hyper-V, when we're doing virtualization, we can use Hyper-V replicas to replicate our virtual machines from one site to another site, and they can even automatically fail over. With other sites, like let's just say TFSA again, let's say the whole TFSA Adelaide campus burns down. Maybe in the temporary meantime, we all say we're actually going to tell our students to go to Tea Tree Gully site to continue their studies in the meantime. Okay. So we can also have what's called offsite backups. So obviously, if you're protecting your data, you can't keep your backups on the same site as where your data is. You can, but that can't only be the only backup. Because if the whole site burns down, what's going to happen with your backups? That's going to be destroyed as well, isn't it? So having offsite backups, and that could be just physically on a different site. For example, with TFSA, we've got Adelaide campus, we've got Noarlunga, we've got Mount Gambier, we've got Tea Tree Gully. Maybe keeping the backups at a different campus so that there's chances of 2 campuses burning down at the same time is probably very, very, very remote. Or if you don't have other sites, you could potentially put this online on the cloud storage like iCloud, like Dropbox, like OneDrive, like Amazon Web Services S3 storage. But what you choose is all dependent on how much it costs, how fast it is, how much capacity it is. Mitigation strategies. Okay, mitigation means make a risk or make a problem less. Okay, so for example, I'll give you an everyday problem. There's a risk that you'll run out of petrol when you're driving your car. Mitigation strategy: always fill up when it gets half full. Okay, so therefore that reduces the risk of ever running out of petrol, isn't it? So that's what I'm talking about. Mitigation means make a problem less or reduce the risks. So here's some example problems. The media where a copy of the backup data is stored becomes corrupt. A mitigation strategy could mean that you have 2 copies of your backup data. Okay. Another problem could be an administrator has accidentally deleted an OU that contains many users and computer objects. Okay, I don't want to spend all that time recreating those objects. Well, a mitigation strategy could be that you leave that checkbox that says protect against accidental deletion. Remember, we've been unchecking that all the time. Well, that actually has a reason for being there. And obviously, don't forget in Active Directory, we'll talk about it, there's Active Directory recycle bin as well. Another problem is a server in a branch office where important files are located has failed. Well, a mitigation strategy might be to use distributed file service, and we'll learn more about that in the next subject for AWS. We use DFS replication to replicate files from the branch office to central data center. Another problem could be that the virtualization infrastructure where business servers are located is unavailable. Well, maybe the mitigation is to avoid deploying all critical servers, such as domain controllers, on the same virtual infrastructure. What does that mean? Instead of having one Hyper-V server, have many Hyper-V servers. In that case, don't put all your domain controllers on the same Hyper-V server, spread them across the 3 different Hyper-V servers potentially. Another problem could be a major outage in data center has occurred. Let's say the outage is like your ISPs, someone was doing work on the street and they've accidentally cut into the concrete and cut off your internet connection. Okay, well, deploy a secondary data center that will contain replicas of most of your central and critical servers in your primary data center. So having a different site. Okay. Some best practices for data protection. To implement data protection strategy, you should perform a risk assessment plan. Basically, work out what are the potential risks and rate them, whether they're high impact, low impact, whether they're highly likely or very unlikely, and then work out what you're going to protect your company against. Discuss the risks you evaluate with your business managers and create a data protection strategy and disaster mitigation strategy. So basically, what this point is saying is that it's not just IT or ICT support that has to worry about this, because you know IT. Do you know what fashion? Do you know hairdressing? Do you know, the building construction? You don't understand their businesses. You don't understand how they store their data or where they store their data. So what you need to do is actually discuss it with those different areas, all the different stakeholders, and to see if what you've actually identified is adequate or correct for their business. So this is everyone's problem. Okay. Ensure that each organization has its own data protection plan. Document all the steps that should be performed in a recovery scenario. So this is important. So if I'm part of the team for the recovery scenario, I'm not just going there, oh, what do I do? What do I do? What do I do? I've got a document that says, in this situation, do this, this, and that. So it's a coordinated approach. Everyone knows their job, and you're not wasting time. You're not potentially damaging the data or damaging the system more than what you need to. Test your recovery plan on a regular basis. Okay, just because you've configured this backup to backup every day and you leave it because it's happening automatically, how do you know it's actually even backing up properly? Well, wouldn't it be worse if that day you want to use the backup, you discover, oh, all the data that's been backing up for the last 6 months has been corrupt? That would be the worst time to find out, when you actually need it. Yeah. That's a good one. Like, so your work had a backup system that automatically backed up to a portable hard drive, but no one actually plugged in the portable hard drive. And then at that point in time when you needed to use a backup, guess what? It didn't get back up. So basically, testing your recovery plan when you don't actually need it is better than, and finding out there's problems is better than finding out there's a problem when you actually need it. You get me, guys? So yeah, that's like most things. You don't want to find out your spare tires are also flat when you actually need that spare tire. Maybe when you fill up petrol, check that the spare tire's inflated. Okay, not necessarily every time, but maybe every couple of months. It's a good idea because it's probably happened to many people around the place. Okay. Evaluate your data protection strategy on a regular basis. So just because it was correct 10 years ago, doesn't mean what you're doing 10 years ago is exactly the same now. Just imagine, just think for yourself. 10 years ago, did we have cloud? Did we have cloud storage? Did we have what's a solid state hard drive? Did we have large capacity drives? You know that technology moves on very quickly, and obviously the way we use things, the way the services we use, where we store things change. So because of that, we should be regularly reviewing our backup strategy or protection strategy on a regular basis. So maybe once a year at the minimum. Planning a backup strategy. So when you're planning your backup strategy, ensure that you determine the critical resources, verify your backups, confirm the backups are secure, ensure the compliance and regulatory responsibilities are met. Like I said, some companies, like for example in the health system in Australia right now at the moment, you cannot store your client or patient information in the cloud because of data sovereignty rules. So you can't place your information about Australian citizens in the health practice on a server that's not in Australia, because obviously Australian rules don't apply to that data if it's stored in Botswana. Okay, so just because we respect privacy here in Australia and we have legislation that enforces it, what if your data is stored in Botswana and someone's accessing the thing? Does your Australian rules apply to that data anymore?
That's how the RFA guys got away with it. They just kept shipping their servers to different countries.
That's right. So a lot of people take advantage of the different laws around these countries. So basically, so if that's one of your regulatory responsibilities, you cannot consider cloud storage if that's part of it. So here's some questions to ask. How do you determine which servers need to be backed up? Okay, so just imagine what would happen if those servers weren't functioning. Turn them off for, probably that's a worst case scenario. What if you turned that server off for 24 hours? Would anyone notice? And if the answer is yes, they would notice, and they would be ringing the phones, and they would be complaining like anything. Then maybe that's a server that you need to back up. Okay. How do you determine if the data is critical? How often it needs to be backed up, and how long it needs to be kept? Okay, some data is not critical. Like for example, the operating system files. They hardly ever change. There's no point backing up them, is there? Okay, whereas like some files, we know that they change quite often. Some files don't change very often, so maybe we don't need to back them up all the time. And when we do back them up, how long do we need to keep it? For example, I take a backup of your assignments that you submit at the end of every semester. I keep that for 18 months, okay? But to be honest, after 18 months, I can delete them. How do you verify that the backup is actually working correctly? So like we said before, you don't want to find out when you need it. So during the time when you don't need it, restore it and see if it contains the correct data. So how often do you perform recovery testing? Okay, how do you align compliance and regulatory requirements with the technical capabilities of your solution? So like I said, some things are regulatory requirements, are laws, or requirements by your industry. So let's go to Windows backup now. So obviously we spoke about how important backup is and all the things to do with backup. How can Windows Server backup play a part in that? So you can use Windows Server backup to backup full server, all volumes, or backups with selected volumes, or even backup selected items. You can also perform what's called a bare metal recovery, which basically means bare metal means just the hardware. If everything was wiped off that hardware. So this bare metal recovery means you're backing up the operating system, the configurations, and restoring it onto the bare metal. There's also this thing called system state, which is basically your configuration and settings of your servers. And if that server happens to be an Active Directory server, that system state will also back up your Active Directory. You can also back up individual files and folders and as required. You can exclude selected files or types of files during backup, and you can still select more than one storage location for the backups. So backups, you need a backup plan, you need a backup strategy. The plan should define at a minimum the frequency, how often you're going to back up. So if you think for yourself at home, do you need a backup every day? Probably not. Do you need a backup every week? Maybe, maybe not. I would suggest for your home backup, you might back up, as required. That's a minimum, but probably you can do weekly backups, which is more sensible. What type of backup is it going to be? Is it going to be a full backup where you back up everything, or is it going to be backing up a partial backup where you back up only files that have changed since the last backup? The storage locations of the backup media. So obviously, if I'm backing up this computer and I'm storing the backups on the same computer, that's probably the wrong place to put it, isn't it? If that computer's hard drive failed, you'll lose the original plus the backup. So obviously that's an example. So make sure you store the location in an independent location to your server, to that data, maybe even to your site. Okay. What about the security requirements of backups? So we've been learning about how we secure our folders and sharing them and controlling permissions who can access them. But if we actually don't do anything for our backups, it just means that anyone could pick up the backup and access all those files you've been spending all this time protecting. So basically, what about your backups? Maybe we can encrypt them, okay? Especially if you're going to store it in an area where you don't trust, like on in a site where you don't trust. Like for example, I'm going to put it in the I'm going to store it in my friend's office. Well, what if he accesses that file? What if I'm storing in the cloud? Well, I can't control I don't control the cloud, and there's a little bit of mistrust of whoever controls it, so I might encrypt it. So if you don't trust something, encrypt it. Three common backups types are used in Windows Server Backup. There's full backup, which backups everything, whether it's been backed up or not. There's incremental backup and copy backup. So let's have a look at this. So full backup, where all the data is backed up. It takes the longest. It takes up the biggest amount of storage. But it includes everything in a single backup. So you're backing up everything. Well, that's good to do every now and then, but maybe it's not the thing you do every day because it takes too long. The backups are too big. So maybe on a weekly basis, we'll do a full backup, but maybe on a daily basis, we'll do an incremental backup, which only backs up that data that actually has changed. Okay, so on a file, on every file, there's what's called a archive bit. You know what a bit is. A bit is a 1 or 0. 1 is on, 0 is off. And basically, when you create a new file, its archive bit will be on. And it will identify to the backup software, I am a new file, or I have changed. That's what that archive bit is representing. If it's on, it means it's a new file or it's changed. When it does a full backup, it actually resets the archive bit to 0. And it stays at 0 until it's been changed, modified again. And if it gets modified, it changes back to 1. And then it indicates to the next backup that I have changed. Okay, so when you do an incremental backup, it will look at this archive bit, and it will actually only back up the files that has been newly created or changed, or where that archive bit is set to 1. When you restore an incremental backup, you have to restore the incremental backup. Before you do that, you have to restore the most recent full backup, and then restore every incremental backup from that full backup until the time you lost the data. So that's a disadvantage of incremental backups because it doesn't contain the old information, it only contains changed information. Okay, so if it's been changed every day, so we have to restore the last full backup plus the incremental backups of every day to guarantee we've got that file. Copy backup will back up all the files you specified, but it will not truncate transactional logs for applications such as Exchange Server or SQL applications. So it's basically not a good idea for backing up those type of files. Active Directory domain services and backup. So basically Active Directory, okay, a lot of it's installed for us, but the fact is when we actually create all these objects in Active Directory, we're spending quite a bit of time doing that, aren't we? If our Active Directory server gets wiped out, what happens to all those things we've been working on? We have to do it again. That's a lot of hassle. So the Active Directory domain database is essential for network operations. We need to back up the domain database, and you should back up the system state. So when we do our backups, you'll realize there's a checkbox that says system state, and that backs up on the domain controller, that backs up the Active Directory as well. But generally, a system state will back up the boot files, the certificates, the registry, IIS metabase, and all these other objects. But if it's a domain controller, it also backs up the Active Directory domain database, the sysvol Active Directory system volume. So which means it backs up your Active Directory effectively. Backup technologies. So there's a couple of other things as well. So obviously there's VSS, volume shadow services. Backup technology. It solves data consistency issues by creating shadow copies. This is not a backup. This is where you actually take a copy of files at different versions, different times. Okay, so it's not really a backup. It's just a sort of point in time capture of your, it's almost like a snapshot, but of your files. Okay, so basically it's going to create these shadow copies at certain times, and obviously the older ones gets deleted eventually, and newer ones replace them. So basically what happens is that, hey, what if I'm working on this PowerPoint, and last Wednesday I actually made a huge amount of changes, then I realized, hey, those changes were wrong. I wish I could add my older copy back, or more older version, the ones before I made those changes. So, well, your backup, you can go to your backups and restore from last week, or if you have volume shadow copy, you don't have to even go and ask your administrator to do that for you. An average user can actually go to the file, which is stored on a network file system, as long as volume shadow services has been configured correctly. That average user, so an average user, normal user, can actually go and look at the previous versions and restore the previous versions, so you can actually have a previous version of your PowerPoint, like I said. The key thing about this is that it does this automatically, and another key thing is that an average user can restore their own files. So you do not have to involve the administrator, you do not have to hassle them and get them to do any work. So therefore, if I was at my desk, I can just look at it myself. With Hyper-V, if you guys go on and do the diploma, you will do the 5 ISV subject, which is all about Hyper-V and virtualization. The Hyper-V, you know, is a virtualization software. But Hyper-V replicas provide you with a disaster recovery option by replicating a consistent copy of virtual machines to another server or a site. What does that mean? That means I've got a Hyper-V here at Adelaide. It's running perfectly with the virtual machines are running perfectly. That's fine. But what if that site gets cut out because someone's cut through our what's the internet connection? Well, if I've configured this Hyper-V replica, it's actually replicating this Hyper-V virtual machine from Adelaide to Mount Gambier, let's say. So if this actually fails here at Adelaide, it'll fail over, meaning that instead of using this one at Adelaide, the one at Mount Gambier gets turned on, and people who are accessing the sites, let's say the website for originally was at Adelaide, will access the same site, but it will be at Mount Gambier. And the great thing about replicas is that it's actually live. As this virtual machine is running, it's constantly replicating to the other site. So therefore, you might have a little slight differences because depending on how fast your network connection is, but essentially it's very close to being the live copy. Okay. Backup capacity. So we all know about storage, don't we? Like, you know, as soon as you tell someone you've got 2 terabytes, you know, sooner or later you're going to fill up that 2 terabytes, aren't you? It doesn't matter what capacity is, eventually you're going to fill it up. So when you're planning your backups, you need to consider the backup capacity. Okay, so what should you consider? You should consider the space requirements for full backups. Okay, so can I back up this to a floppy disk? You guys probably don't even know what a floppy disk is. Oh, you do? That's good. No, probably that was a ridiculous question, so probably won't. Okay, so therefore you have to choose the right backup media to store the amount of data that you're going to be backing up. The space requirements for incremental backups. The amount of time required to back up. How often you back up, the frequency, and how long you keep these backups for. the retention. Like we mentioned, backup security. When you're planning a backup security, consider the following. Does the backups contain all your organizational data? And if someone else were able to look at that data, would that be a problem? If it is, then you need to control access to the backup media. Means all access to all data. Okay? So Windows Backup does not encrypt the backups itself. So you might have to encrypt it after the fact. Okay? So you can use Microsoft BitLocker. You can use your third-party tools like TrueCrypt, or you can use another vendor's product to encrypt it. We need to also don't forget about physical protection. So physical protection security is one of the easiest ways and most effective ways to secure your things. So if my backup media is just sitting in the coffee shop, that's not a very secure location, is it? But if I actually lock it up in a safe that's on my site in a secure area where average people can't go to, then they're not going to have the opportunity to look at it or access it. So obviously, we're talking about Microsoft, and obviously Microsoft has a cloud provider called Microsoft Azure. Okay, so we've been talking about storing our backups in the cloud. Well, Windows Azure backup features include a single configuration management, block level incremental backups, data compression and encryption and throttling, data integrity verification in the cloud, and configurable retention policies for storing the data in the cloud. Essentially, everything we've been talking about is able to be provided or configured in the Azure Backup, except for the legislative requirements like, can you keep this data in the cloud at all? So I might sound like a bit of an ad at this stage, but basically it's a Microsoft's course, and in all their things, they're promoting their products. It does not mean you can't consider other providers like Amazon Web Services, okay, like Google Cloud. They all provide similar products. So just to balance things out, I mentioned those companies as well. Consider an enterprise backup solution. So considerations for enterprise backup solution is, what is the theoretical restore point objective of the product? So how long can you restore back to? How quickly is the RTO, restore time objective? So if I needed to restore, how long would it take? Does the solution provide centralized backup? So is this so that I can configure backup in one place and backup all these things in one go? That would be great, wouldn't it? I wouldn't have to go configure backups on 10 different servers if I can just configure in one place and all 10 servers are able to be backed up from one place. Is the solution supported by vendors? So basically, people are going to sell you hardware for backups, NASs, storage, backup drives, and so forth. Do they have software, and is this software supported? Is these hardware vendors supporting this software that you're going to use? What is the recovery point capacity? So with Data Protection Manager, which is a Server 2016 tool, it allows you to centralize backups, offers 15-minute snapshots of servers and clients, can store backup data on a SAN or export it to a tape. It can back up remote sites. It can be used as a part of your backup to the cloud strategy. So you can use DPM to back up your data and send it to the cloud automatically. And it supports all Microsoft products. So this is a Microsoft tool. So again, I sound like a ad, but basically I'm just making you aware of this. But there's always other products. It's up to you as the person who is the decision maker to assess all the products, what they can do, what are the costs, what are the advantages, what's the disadvantages. Yeah, make it a smart decision. But sometimes you can get caught out because I've got Microsoft solution for everything. It's just easy to keep on using Microsoft, which is what they really want you to do. But that's not necessarily a bad thing either, okay? So, what I'm saying is be sensible, be smart, assess all your options, and decide on the best one for your situation. Options for server recovery. So options for server recovery includes files and folders, application and data, volumes, the operating system, the full server, the system state. So a BCD edit allows you to edit the BCD store to modify boot options, safe mode boot computers with minimal services and drivers. There's also a last known good. So basically, this is in a situation where if I've just installed a new driver and suddenly my computer goes blue screen. Okay, so by actually booting up and selecting last known good, it actually removes the last set. Uses the last set of drivers and registry from the last successful backup. So to get more information, there's a link here for you to get more information from. But when we actually do our worksheet, we'll use Windows backups, and you'll find that that's what we're going to be assessing on in the practical test. There's also a server restore Windows recovery environment. So Windows RE allows you to recover server images or volumes from a local disk to a network or a network share. You need to enter the Windows RE when you boot from install media or you press F8. Successive boot failure, so when you try to boot and you fail and you boot and you fail, will automatically get you to the recovery environment. So when you restore Active Directory, remember we talked about how we can restore or backup Active Directory. When we restore Active Directory, we can't restore it while Active Directory is running. Okay, so we have to get into this recovery environment before we can actually restore Active Directory. So data recovery, so there's 4 options for recovering data. Include allowing users to recover their own data. So that volume shadow copy allows users to get previous versions and recover their own data. We can recover data to an alternate location, so we may not be sure about this data. Maybe we don't want to replace everything that's changed or been accidentally deleted. So we restore it to a different location and manually go through the files and choose which ones we want. Or we can recover to the original location, because the original location is where we actually accidentally deleted a whole heap of things, and we just restore it to that location. And we can also do a full volume recovery, which basically recovers the whole volume. Restoring with Windows Azure Backup. So when you're restoring files from files by using Windows Azure Online Backup, you need to perform the following steps. You need to select the server. You need to locate the files you want to recover from the backup, and you need to choose where you want to restore it. And then you select an option for copy creation. Planning continuity. So backing up the data is just one part. Okay, obviously the servers, the hardware is the second part, and also your network infrastructure. So basically, planning for continuity is how can we keep on to do our business if our hardware, if our data, if our network infrastructure, even if our whole site fails. So here's a couple of options from Microsoft. There's clustering. Clustering means instead of having one computer do a job, you have many computers all working together to do a job. It could be a failover cluster, or it could be a load balancing cluster. Failover cluster means you have one server which is active and maybe another server which is not active. But when the active server fails, the inactive server takes over and continues the work. Whereas load balancing means all servers are active, but they just balance the load of requests or sessions between the different servers. So clustering allows more than one server to provide the same service to a network while appearing as a single server to the client. So from a client's point of view, you're just accessing what you normally access. You don't know how it's working behind the scenes. Yeah, they appear as if it's one server, okay? They appear to the clients as if it's a single server, but behind the scenes, it could be multiple servers doing the same job. So Windows Failover Clustering Service provides server clustering for Windows-based servers. Windows Server offers another clustering feature called Network Load Balancing, and this is not necessarily for failing over. This is for balancing the load across multiple computers. If the work is so much that one server can't do it, it's just like if we had a whole heap of bricks to move from one side of the yard to another side of the yard, and if I had to do it by myself, it's a lot of work, and I'll take a long time to do it. But if I got you guys all to help me, we're going to get that work done a lot faster, so we can do more work. So that's what the load balancing is all about. Network load balancing, or NLB, is used to distribute workloads across multiple servers on a session-by-session basis.
Like they didn't do for the census.
Oh yeah, the census, they didn't get the load balancing adequate. Okay, so not that they didn't do it, but they didn't foresee or plan for it correctly. All right, guys. So backup and restoration will make a lot more sense once you do this worksheet. And obviously, if you're struggling with this worksheet, get me to help you.